Well, I think there is some irony that in a quarterfinal of a debate tournament, I'm going to argue that our words don't matter as much as some other things, but here we are. I also want to share some words that are heartfelt. Leslie was the first person that I ever scrimmaged in IPDA, and having my last tournament, potentially last round, be against her is an honor, and I'm very happy for it. So let's go ahead and define some of this resolution. It isn't what we say or think that defines us, but what we do. Say, of course, is what you verbally express. Think is what you have in your head. Defines us is essentially characterized, and what we do is act. I'm not going to define this in a squirrely way. This is a principle resolution, and that means that I have to show you it is more likely than not that we should pay more attention to actions than words or thoughts, especially those of others. If you think it's 51% true, you ought to affirm. Let's get into 4 key contentions. Contention 1 is social impact. Again, social impact. Subpoint A is the civil rights movement. Certainly, some words were said by Dr. Martin Luther King, but those words carry no meaning without the actions that preceded or followed them. The Montgomery bus boycott, the March on Washington, the sit-ins, all of these actions created power and a platform for the words to matter at all. Subpoint B is social research. Again, social research. Humans are some of the few species in the world that can be deceptive and lie. Because of that, it means that we assume that when others have words, they might not always be true, so we pay attention to the actions. It's called the fundamental attribution bias. That takes us to contention 2, which is reliability of actions. Subpoint A, under reliability of actions, is fraud versus philanthropy. You might have heard of Sam Bankman-Fried. He was in the FTX bank scandal. He said a lot of words about his being a very upstanding organization. Those words were lies. The action was committing fraud. The words are ignored when he finally goes to court. We pay attention to the action and he is punished. The same is true with Bernie Madoff. The same is true with the Enron scandal. The same is true with Elizabeth Holmes. All examples of folks who said one thing and did another. They were defined by what they did, not by what they said. We go to subpoint B, which is climate change and the Paris Agreement. One of the issues with the Paris Agreement is that it's a functionally non-binding resolution. Donald Trump and his followers said, this doesn't do anything. We still see that India and China are likely to pollute, which means that the words will not create action. Then Trump turned around and said a bunch of words about wanting to have beautiful skies and clean air, and then he appoints Ryan Zinke in part of the Department of the Interior, and this individual also keeps polluting. So the words don't matter. The actions in both cases take precedence. The pollution is the impact. Contention 3 is the judicial system. Again, the judicial system. Subpoint A is that actions determine mens rea. This is a legal term. It's basically what you're supposed to be thinking. And we know the actions determine this by looking at examples like Alex Murdaugh. If you're from South Carolina, you might be familiar. He was the big shot attorney who ended up annihilating some of his own family members. In order to determine what he was actually thinking, because the guy's a great liar, he's a lawyer, they looked at everything that he had done leading up to the murders. Cell phone coverage that he had turned off, places that he had gone, visiting the kennels, looking at all that. From that, they pieced together his intent, which is murder. Only by the actions can we even find what the thoughts are. Which takes us to subpoint B, which is unprovability. In court, we understand that eyewitness testimony is often unreliable. We cannot know thoughts. Thoughts shift back and forth all the time. We can lie to ourselves. Only by tracing the actions can we know the truth. Contention 4 is words are meaningless without actions, but not the reverse. Subpoint A is tikkun olam. This is the Jewish principle of charity. The point of tikkun olam is that you give charity without ever saying anything about it. That is the virtue, doing something without being braggadocious. Subpoint B is in relationships. I've been married for a number of years. I've been with my high school sweetheart for over a decade. You don't always have to say the thing. In fact, some people who say the thing, they say, I'm not going to cheat on you, honey, and then they cheat. What matters, the lie or the action? In a relationship, a small kiss or rub on the back, a hug without saying anything can have far greater meaning. This takes us to subpoint C, which is politicians. Think about the United Nations. The UN has a lot of resolutions, like one that was sponsored recently by the US, basically saying we're no longer going to be supporting what's going on in Israel with regards to Hamas. And then they're still funding Israel. So they say one thing, the action is different, the impact of what's going on right now in the area of Palestine. And subpoint D is given a flip. Again, given a flip. We don't care what people have to say unless they have acted in some way to make us listen to them. For all these reasons, this resolution is more true than not. I look forward towards an affirmative ballot. I thank you for your time.
All right, I've got 2 minutes on the clock. Is everyone ready? All right, 2 minutes starting now. Thank you so much for your kind words. I really think they do mean a lot. So first question I have is, what motivates what we do?
I mean, both of them definitely motivates. You can be motivated by words, but the greater sociological studies indicate that actions are primary motivators. And that's because of research from this guy called Charles Duhigg on the concept of habit forming.
Okay.
Can I explain that?
Let's stop right there
Okay.
before we go into any more evidence that my opponent's gonna bring in. So whenever you're talking about who defines us? Who defines us?
It's a combination of ourselves and others.
Okay, a combination of ourselves and others, got it. So whenever you're talking about we need validation, so do you think that Sam Freud did, or I don't know his name, Friedman, do you think that he thought he was a fraud?
Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
But also, to be clear, I'm not sure. I can judge him by the actions, I cannot read his mind. But I
Gotcha.
think he probably knew what he was doing was wrong.
Gotcha. And then what motivated his actions?
Greed.
Greed, okay? Is greed like something that is in action, or is
Yes,
greed
we can-
intrinsic?
To be clear, we can only know if somebody is greedy based on them having greedy actions. Like, I could say I'm super greedy, then I give to charity. Nobody would then adequately define me as greedy.
Gotcha. Can our actions not align with who we are?
I'm not clear on the question, I'm sorry.
Could I be a bad person but do a good thing?
Yeah, we know that you're a bad person because of your actions, then you did a good action. So there's a bunch of actions.
So what if I am a bad person, but I just don't do bad things?
I'd say you're not a bad person. If you never do a bad thing, I don't think anyone would call you a bad person.
However, what if I think I'm a bad person? Does my perception of myself not matter?
Then you might need to take the action of going to therapy so that you're able to talk through those thoughts.
Dang. Okay. Alright. Everyone ready?
Yeah.
Alright. 6 minutes on my clock, and I'm going to start now. Thank you so much for all being here today. I equally am just so excited to be going against Iain again. Slightly terrified, but that's okay. That's just my feeling. And I really just want to start off by addressing the fact that what Iain said really does strike true to my core. What his words mean to me mean a lot, specifically because my love language and the way that I see appreciation is through words, not actions. Iain could have written my case for me and I would have been appreciative. However, his words saying how much he is appreciative of me and like how much he respects me, that goes far for me. And so whenever we're really looking at what defines us today, what defines us is not just what people see, but also what we believe of ourselves. And that's where I'll go in with top case. So first, my opponent lays out a very clean round. I completely agree to this idea of more likely than not what characterizes us. I completely agree to all the definitions. And today what I'm going to show you is it's not what we do, but it's also what we think that defines us. So first I'm going to go into my opponent's first point, basically talking about the social impact. He basically brings up the civil rights movement, and basically says words mean nothing. We see the boycotts, we see all of these things. However, when you think of Martin Luther King, I bet you think of those words. I have a dream. That is what defined Martin Luther King. That is the word that still stays in our mind and true, what he said. And also, when we're really looking at the motivation behind those events, that came from a thought, a desire to be free, not an action. So when we're really looking at this social research, my opponent basically in their second subpoint of their first point, they basically say that we can be deceptive and lie. We have a habitual tendency to be deceptive and lie. And I will tell you right now, that does not just count with actions, that also counts with words. We can easily say, hey girl, I really love your outfit today, and not mean it, okay? We can easily go and give charity and then easily think poorly of the poor. So it does not matter. We can deceptively act as easy as we can deceptively say words. And so whenever we're looking at my opponent's second contention, he talks about the reliability factor and basically brings up all of these individuals who did bad things while said good things. And so basically what we can see is that their thoughts are what drove them to action. I asked about fraud. I said, do you think that this guy actually thought he was a fraud? Maybe not, maybe so, but he knew that what he was fueled by was greed, which is a concept in the mind. And so we see that his actions were motivated by a thought of greed, by a desire of greed that is intrinsic, not extrinsic. Additionally, when we're looking at climate change, my opponent talks about the Paris Agreement and basically all of these words. However, some people are not taking action. However, a lot of people are taking action. And what we do see is other people's words are starting to hold individuals accountable. The upset of the 2020 election for Trump shows that, hey, we did not like that his words were not going along with his actions. However, what does matter is our words, our thoughts. And so that's what we see with that. Additionally, my opponent talks about the justice system and basically talks about how we do not trust oaths not because we don't believe what people say, but because perception can be different. Perception can be varied. And so when we're really looking at that, the actions are sometimes not enough. Lastly, my opponent says basically we can give charity without saying things. Often people do not do nice things without saying things. We instead see that people sometimes say they do nice things and don't. And that's where I'm just going to go into my place to clarify all of the things that I've kind of refuted. And while I'm in my case, I'm going to directly refute my opponent's case as well. So today, judges, I am looking at and I am negating the resolution that it isn't what we say or think that defines us, but what we do. So I am negating that resolution today. My first contention is what drives action. My subpoint A is that motivation matters. Psychology Today said that motivation is generally described as the force that drives us to pursue a goal. Motivation is a starting point for all choices. Motivation, that intrinsic motivation, the thing that is generating in our thoughts and what we say, all of that is motivating our actions. Additionally, in a survey from Microsoft, basically they asked professionals what is the definition of motivation. They said it is the internal state that propels an individual to engage in goal-directed behavior. Once again, whenever we're looking at that Sam Floydman case, we see that it is his desire, his motivation of greed that is actually causing his action. Additionally, my second contention today is what drives motivation, and that is perception. Psychology Today states that what we control and where we really start to create our reality is how we perceive events, and then we respond with our behavior. Therefore, what we are seeing once again is our past is influencing what we do. Our perception of reality, our thoughts on reality are basically impacting what we do. We can apply that to the civil rights movement. Once again, the feeling of injustice, is basically what motivates our actions in order to boycott. Lastly, I want to talk about society. Whenever we're looking at society, society is amplifying our voice at the moment. We see social media being a major action that amplifies individuals' voice and defines who we are. Based on what I say on social media is defining what other people believe of me. And that is becoming more and more prevalent in society. And with that, I stand down and urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
All good. Starting time right now. Thanks for that speech. Just some clarification. You said you agreed to all of the top case. Is that what I heard?
Correct.
And as far as all the top case, that means that the judges might believe that this quote is only 51% true, and they still vote in favor of affirmation. We're on the same page?
Of course.
So let's go into your case specifically. You had an observation about your love language, is that right?
Yes.
Now, there's a lot of different love languages, true?
Yes.
Some of them action-based, some words-based.
Yeah.
So that's a wash, right?
I don't call it a wash because I think that actions do have impact, but I also think what we say can equally have impact as well.
So if it's equal, it sounds like it's a wash to me. I'll just move on to the next. You say here, what drives, you say motivation matters. What does Charles Duhigg say about this?
Charles Duhigg probably says something about this.
He does. He talks specifically about how habits are formed by previous actions. So I'll ask an example of this. How many people say, I'm gonna go to the gym, I'm gonna do it, and they never do?
How many people also have had previous experiences that made them say, hey, I wanna go to the gym because someone said to me that I was fat, and then they didn't go to the gym because of the insecurity and the experience of what other people have said and the worry of other people's perceptions. So those thoughts are impacting the lack of action.
Gotcha, so that sounds like it's a wash if it's a back and forth that way.
No, it's not a wash.
Let's move on to the next bit. The next bit that you say here is on perception. We can only perceive people's actions, not their thoughts, correct?
I think that we can perceive their words as well.
But on the thoughts point, what am I thinking?
I have two things that you might be thinking in my head. What are you thinking?
I'm not gonna say. That's my time, okay. All good? Sorry, I have a 3-minute speech, so a lot to get through, but I will act to make it happen. Let's go through my opponent's case. Her first observation on love languages, judges, I'd argue that this is a wash, but you can cross-apply the cheating example that I gave from before. The action of cheating overwhelms anyone who says, oh honey, I'm not gonna cheat on you. The action matters more. Her sole contention says what drives you. Step 1A is on motivation matters, 2 responses. The first response comes from Charles Duhigg, who talks about habit formation. His whole thesis is that when somebody acts, it creates a trigger in their mind that's going to cause more action in the future. So somebody never goes to the gym, then they finally go there and it becomes a norm in their life to keep attending the gym. That is a greater motivating factor than just saying that you're going to do it. This is what the research says. But if you don't buy that, there's a second response from Chip and Dan Heath of Stanford. They've got a book called Switch. Their biggest thing is that anything that you think is influenced by the actions taken in your surrounding environment. For example, somebody is far more likely to not gorge themselves on food if they take the action of moving the chips just across the room from their workplace. The action matters more, and I have a 51% burden. Finally, on our argument about perception, we can only perceive actions. We cannot perceive thoughts, as we all know. You just saw that in the back and forth. So as a result, clearly the actions matter more. Also, we can only respond through actions or else the words are meaningless. I think the society point wasn't really fleshed out. She says social media action, but you've probably heard of the idea of slacktivism, where people post a lot on social media, but they don't do anything on social media. There was like the free Coney thing that was happening back in 2012. There's a whole bunch of examples of these where words don't mean anything. This takes us back to the affirmative case. I think that you can begin by making a lot of extensions here. First, on the civil rights movement, I preempted her argument. I told you that the only reason people listen to the MLK speech is because of the actions that preceded it. Sit-ins, Montgomery bus boycott, March on Washington, and I also would argue that they're responding to the action of segregation. And if the speech did not respond to the action of Brown v. Board of Education, then this would be meaningless. On the subpoint B on research, she says we can lie. That's literally my point. We can lie, so based on what I said the thesis is, what do you pay more attention to? Pay more attention to the actions, less so to the words. Contention 2 is on reliability. I talked about fraud. She says thoughts drove themselves to action. I think that it's far more likely that habits drove them to actions. Once you cheated once, you're likely to cheat again. Once you've broken the law once, you're more likely to do it again because you created a trigger in your own mind. That's the Duhigg evidence. On climate change, she said other words hold them accountable. No, they didn't. Voting held them accountable. That is an action that you take. Turn this argument. The judicial system argument, she drops the Alex Murdaugh example entirely. On the improvability argument, I wasn't clear on the response, but I think we can both agree our own recollection of our thoughts are somewhat weak. And then going back to my contention 4, there just isn't specific clash here on any of it. The affirmation may have the burden of proof, litigation has the burden of clash. Extend Tikkun Olam, extend relationships, extend the UN example, extend giving a flip, because none of that is directly responded to. I think I'm making the 51% margin, so I ask for your ballot.
5 minutes on the clock. Everyone ready? All right, 5 minutes starting now. As this is my last speech, I want to thank all of you. I kind of surprised myself by getting this far, and that says a lot. And thank you so much, Iain, for all your help and all the assistance that you've provided me. So really quickly, before I even go into anything else, I'm going to go into the resolution, and then I'm going to refute some of my opponent's points that they brought up in their last speech, and then I'll give you some voters. So first, it isn't what we say or think that defines us, but what we do. I strongly negate the resolution because once again, we see that what actually drives us to action is what we think. And I'm going to turn up my opponent's arguments and show you, judges, exactly where the root of all action is. It's in your mind. My opponent even said that. So first I'm going to look at what my opponent refuted in my case. So I say what drives action is motivation. He basically says that he brings in this Charles Duhigg, which is basically once you take an action, there's more action in the future. But what took that first action? Your mind, your thought. Once again, your mind is still creating the next actions that are taking place. So what we still see is the thought is what is motivating our actions. Additionally, my opponent brings in this idea of switch. And basically, if you move something further away from you, then you are less likely to take action or more likely to take action if it's closer to you. This, once again, is a thought. The desire in and of itself to not have interaction with a specific thing still shows that we are doing and defined more by what we think than what we do. I think that I should not have that bag of chips, which means I will not have that bag of chips. I will move it further away from me. And those are the things that we see in this. Additionally, my opponent says that we cannot perceive thoughts. However, we can understand words. What we say does define us. Whenever we're really talking about that, we really just don't see that flowing throughout. Additionally, when we're really looking at society, once again, I have said that society is amplifying our voice, what we say. And even if we're not taking actions on what we say, we still see that our words have impact. And that is really important whenever we're looking at this round today. Really quickly, I'm going to go through the civil rights movement as well as my opponent's refutation to my refutation. So my opponent says that the only reason they even listened to that speech in the first place was because of the actions taken by the boycott, and basically says that segregation is what made people feel unjust. And you know what caused segregation? Was the mental idea, the thought that African Americans had more power and could threaten white power. That is what made segregation happen. Our thoughts are what propel our actions. We see what comes first is the thought, not the action. Additionally, my opponent basically says that the habits are what are driving people to action. However, what forms habits? Your mind. What you think is what is driving your habits. If you indulge one time in that habit, or you do any of the things, that is a thought. You had the thought to basically fraud other people. Additionally, my opponent brings in the ideas that I have dropped today. And what I really want you to think about, Judge, is when we're looking at what more likely than not is happening, we do not see the weight that my opponents or my dropped arguments on my opponent's case are holding. He basically just says that I dropped these so it's a flow. If you do that, that is you saying in your mind that you are just holding these ideas higher than what I have shown you today, which is once again that thought is propelling action. You cannot just blindly say that my dropped arguments without a tie-in are more worthy to be flowed throughout the round if it does not actually have weight. And my opponent did not tie in and say why those specific arguments are more important and should give you a ballot for today. So what we're looking at today, judges, are a couple of voters. My first voter is the driving force. Motivation. First voter, motivation. It is what we think and what we say that causes our actions. We see in my contentions that motivation is the internal state that is propelling individuals to engage in goal-oriented behavior. That is action. My opponent brings in these points talking about habits. Habits are formed by thoughts. Think to do something, then you do it. There is no way that we are going to just deny the fact that our thoughts do not cause our actions. Additionally, my second voter today is more likely than not. More likely than not. In each of the scenarios that my opponent has brought up, we see that there is a driving force behind the action, and that driving force all started in the mind. I've refuted most of these ideas and basically turned a lot of his arguments. And for all those reasons, you should vote in a negative ballot. Thank you.
Last speech starting right now. Thank you, Leslie. It's really a pleasure. I'm going to get into this with two different segments to my speech. The first segment is addressing my opponent's voters. The second is giving you mine. Let's begin with my opponent's voters. The first argument is a driving force argument. That is not what the topic is asking. I said in the start of my speech, in the very beginning of everything, that you would be evaluating whether you should be judging people more by their actions or by their words. In other words, what should you be looking to in order to define a person? I said that, she agreed with it, that's what we're going at. She's trying to make this into a chicken and the egg argument. She's like, which one comes first? That is not what the topic is asking. It's not my definition. It is not a reason to negate. But moreover, I also responded to this twice with the studies from Charles Duhigg on habit formation and with the dropped analysis about switch. That's Chip and Dan Heath that talked about moving something away in order to shape everything else. So even if you buy this, it's a turn in favor of the affirmation. Her second voter is more likely than not. I think I can respond to this in sum by going through my three voters. These are going to be framed as questions. Question number one, what does the affirmative have to prove? The answer is the affirmative doesn't have to 100% convince you of every example. The affirmative has to look at the majority of examples that you've seen today and show you that at least 51% tilt in favor of the affirmation. We've all agreed to that here. That's all I have to prove. No chicken and the egg thing, but should you be judging individuals based on their actions at least 51% of the time as opposed to their words? And the answer is, obviously, I have proven that. That takes us to question number two, which is, what do the examples say? Because when you look towards my opponent's case, she has an example of perception. I turned that to say we can only perceive actions and respond through actions. She dropped her own social media point, and there's no specific example under the motivation point aside from my terms. We have a lot of clash back and forth on civil rights. My thing is that the action of segregation and action of desegregation were certainly more important here. And I've given you Sam Bankman-Fried, I've given you Bernie Madoff, I've given you Elizabeth Holmes, I've given you Enron, I've given you Paris Agreement, given you Trump. I turned the argument on voting to show the action of voting matters more in this case. The examples are overwhelmingly in favor of the affirmation. That takes us to question number three. In this quarterfinal round of pro, what is the tiebreaker? Because you might be looking for a tiebreaker on your flow. The tiebreaker certainly has to be the dropped fourth contention here. There were so many times that they could have had a response, and there's just nothing on the flow on an entire religion, on the notion of relationships, on the notion of the United Nations, and that we don't care about what you say until you act. That just dropped. In the end, you're going to have to make an action here today. That action will be circling one of the two sides and then flipping over the page. When you make that action, I hope that you do it in favor of the affirmation, and I thank you for your time.